Life can be cruel, beautiful, bittersweet, and at times terrifying. People make mistakes, and unfortunately, sometimes those mistakes can cost someone their life. Here are 8 stories of people who made a mistake that accidentally killed someone. Enjoy. It was 1976. I was 6 years old. My grandpa was my best friend and my hero. He always wore striped bib overalls, so I had to have matching ones. I'd sit on his lap, and we'd eat Cheerios and watch Zorro. We'd also play a silly game pulling hair out of each other's arms. We were wrestling around one day, and I hit him in the nose with my head, and it started to bleed. So badly that he ended up in the hospital. He died 2 days later. I was always told that I remembered it wrong, and I had nothing to do with it. Last year I was at my uncle's, another man who I greatly admire. I knew he would tell me the truth, so I asked him. He said I remembered it correctly. Grandpa was taking blood thinners, and the hospital never really got the bleeding to stop, and he choked to death on his own blood. Before anyone says my uncle was an asshole for telling me this, I am grateful to finally know the truth. I work armed security for a campus police department. I had a guy walk into the area where I was eating my dinner with a cut down the side of his face. So naturally, I shift into help mode, and I'm all about getting this guy first aid. He proceeds to tell me someone has just stolen his car and cut his face. So I call for a police officer to handle the felony report and medics for the guy's face. My patrol car had a trauma kit for an active shooter situation. We're only supposed to use it on fellow officers, but since this guy was bleeding down his face, I offered it to him, with a caveat that I'm not an EMT, and he accepted. So I proceed to hop up and go to my car that was right by the door. However, as I got to the door, I noticed this guy was lagging right behind me. And I don't like people behind me, so I stopped and tried to get him to sit down and wait for me to get the kit. That's when he said, "Officer, I have a problem." I don't remember hearing anything after that. It was at this point that he conjured up a mini sledgehammer. I have no idea where it came from. It was just there in his hand, and he was raising it up high. I mouthed a slow, breathy, "Oh, fuck me," and started backing up and drawing my pistol. The situation took a big spiral downward after that, because by backing up, I tripped over some furniture and fell down between an ottoman and a fireplace grate, with my weapon side down to the ground. He was charging through with that hammer, so I couldn't stand up or I'd be in range. So I just dove away into a corner. He plowed through the furniture, and I was still on the ground. That's when I cracked. Nowhere to go, no distance to create. The guy I was going to help was going to kill me. All I wanted to do was curl into a ball, cry, and beg for my life. Once that flash of pathetic wimpiness hit, I became pissed, absolutely livid. I was mad at myself for giving up. Mad at this asshole who thought he was going to kill me. I've never, ever felt that kind of rage before. I got into a kneeling position and then bum rushed him. I grabbed the wrist with a hammer and shook the shit out of it until he dropped the hammer. Then, in my rage, all I wanted to do was rip his scraggly beard off his fucking face. My memory blanks out right there and kicks back in with me leaning way back against a desk and this guy over top of me. After that, he started to paw at my holster, tried to grab my neck with both hands, eventually pulled a picture-perfect takedown and got full mount. I was on my feet, grappling out in the open with no furniture or anything blocking me, and I knew I was too gassed to keep going. There was no hammer anymore, but I couldn't keep fighting this grapple fest that we were in. I shoved him hard, drew my gun, pulled the trigger. Click. Misfire. Hands down the biggest what the fuck moment I've ever had. I managed to shove him again, racked the slide, and then fired 2 rounds. My auditory memory kicked back in and he said, "All right, I'm done. I'm done." And that's when he fell to the floor, but kept flopping around trying to get back up. I got my radio up and running and called for backup. I could see blood up on his shoulder, but I just kept my gun on him and waited for backup, just trying to breathe and not puke up the food I was just eating. My backup arrived and told me to go outside, where I immediately puked up spaghetti and lemon pepper chicken. The guy died before the medics could stabilize him in the room. From the time I called for police and medics to the time I called shots fired, it was 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's all it took to end someone else's life. 3 minutes that changed my life forever. When I was 14, my friends and I wanted to go to the beach, so I suggested the one near my house. It was notorious for bad rips, but I just figured that we would spot them and stay away. It was about 6 p.m. when we got there, and the lifeguards had gone home. We were in knee-deep water when we felt the pull of a rip. Me and one other friend made it out, but the 2 that were less than a meter further out couldn't. For the first 5 minutes, we thought that they would be fine and that they would catch a wave in. After that, we knew that there was a problem. We started looking and eventually found an off-duty lifeguard 10 minutes after they were swept out. The lifeguard got aboard and was able to save one of my friends, but he couldn't find the other. Her body was found later that night. If I had not suggested that beach, if I had been quicker to find a lifeguard, if I had spotted the riptide, my best friend would still be alive. In 1995, I was living with my druggy mother and sister, who was 4 years older than me. My mom worked at a bar, and as a 7-year-old kid, I lived half-time in that bar. We did have a sort of house that was more of a shed on a lot that was converted into a house. My mom had gotten close with one of the patrons who also drank a lot and did drugs. One day, she broke up with him, and I guess he kept coming over and threatening her. A few days later, she gets a call from him. I don't know what was said, but she hurried to get us in the back room where she kept our clothes. She attempted to hide us under all the clothes, but I started freaking out and tried to leave the house. As I get to the front door, a truck pulls in. I stop and hear him get out, screaming at my mother. He tries to get in the door at first and fails. I am about 3 feet to the side of the front door. He shoots at the door. I freak out and jump on top of the couch that's right next to the door, while also grabbing my t-ball bat. He kicks and kicks at the door, and finally it opens. He walks in, and I plowed him right in the forehead with my bat. He instantly goes out. I scream, and my mother finally comes out with my sister, and we both leave and call the police at the bar. That same night, I went to go live with my father permanently, as my mother had arrest warrants. I didn't know until I was 16 that the guy had ended up dying in the hospital between my concussion and alcohol poisoning. But I don't feel bad about it at all. I was a truck driver in training. We were driving late at night on US 277 between Piedras Negras and Del Rio. It's kind of an armpit of Texas. Flat, straight, boring, right near the border. I was at the wheel. My driver mentor was in his bunk, but awake, chatting with me. I saw headlights ahead, a long way off. Didn't really think anything of it. After a while, they got close, and it looked like they went to turn left, only there wasn't a road there. Then they straightened out and drove right into us head on. I had just enough time to see that it was a Tacoma, and the driver was male, and all I could do was let go of the steering wheel and hit the brakes. We were busted up pretty badly, but we cut that pickup in two. I had a broken wrist. My mentor had broken ribs and a bruised liver. We got out to see the damage, and when we walked to the rear, I saw a work boot sitting on the double yellow line with about 6 inches of leg sticking out of it. I still get an odd feeling in my stomach when I think about it. Obviously, I didn't plan to kill the guy, and there wasn't much I could do without foreknowledge. Semis aren't exactly nimble, but it takes a bit to tell yourself you couldn't have done anything else. The guy had a wife and 2 little girls. When I was a medical student on my surgery rotation, I was in the OR with only the attending surgeon. The residents on service were otherwise busy, so the attending surgeon somewhat impatiently decides, fine, I'll do it with just the med student. It's a relatively straightforward case, placing a gastric tube for a patient who could not eat. The institution I work at now frequently does these under laparoscopic visualization, which is seen as overly cautious by some, but not me. The attending puts a scope down the patient's esophagus, and I have a big needle to push toward the scope. His scope has a bright light which he shines toward the skin when he's entered the stomach, and I press on the skin. I see it dent in on the screen, showing we're in the right place. I thought I took the exact same position and angle and introduced the needle. However, it did not show up on screen, so I pulled back, pressed again, and did not see it. The attending grows frustrated and tells me to push the needle in deeper. I had a twinge of concern, but eventually hubbed the needle, which was several inches long. Never saw it on the screen. Eventually, the resident shows up and tries as well. He introduces the needle, but can never visualize it. Eventually, he switched places with the attending, and after another try, got the needle into the stomach, and we finished placing the tube. I came back after my day off to find out that the patient had died from internal bleeding. One of the multiple needle pokes, or possibly a cumulative effect, had injured arteries in the abdomen, leading to them bleeding out overnight. Now I know not to ignore that twinge. And I know that even low-risk procedures have a risk of catastrophe. And always take care to mention that when consenting patients for surgery. Low risk, not no risk. I harbored guilt over it throughout medical school and still had hesitation the first time I did that procedure as a resident. I was working out of town, which is pretty common in my line of work, touring with bands. We had just started a new tour with an artist, but as a crew, a bunch of us had been working together over the last few years. When you work these long hours, sometimes under ridiculous pressure and circumstances, and live in a tour bus, you become incredibly close, like a family. You're together through everything. Long, incredibly hard days, or the joy of something new or somewhere new. We had just went through a week of rehearsals, then took a ferry to Victoria from Vancouver to start the tour. First show done. We all had such a great time, a really easy first day. The show went off without a hitch, and we even finished a few hours earlier than we expected. We all went back to the hotel to get food and have a drink. Our rooms were right next to each other. It was a nice spring night. We sat outside on our adjoining balconies. My friend was a wine expert. He loved red wine. I had an unopened bottle of red in my room, and he had an unopened bottle of white in his, which he knew I liked. He leaned over his railing to pass me a bottle, which I easily grabbed from him. The balconies were so close together, so I passed him the bottle of red from my room. But he slipped. The balcony was wet. After this point, I have no memory of any sounds, but everyone on the tour staying on that side of the hotel heard me screaming. I saw him go over the railing. I saw him hit the side of the hotel, and I saw him land 50 feet below me. I ran to the elevator. I yelled at the front desk to call 911 on my way past, but it was too late. It would not have mattered. I got to him and looked into his eyes. They were lifeless. A large piece of the back of his head was just a few feet away from us. I held his hand and sobbed that I was sorry until a security guard pulled me off. From that day on, we were a tour family, connected by the worst bond imaginable. I was 14 and spent the night at my best friend's house after our hometown 4th of July celebration. Woke up in the morning to find that her mother had left us to babysit her 8-month-old sister while she ran errands. We were painting our nails on the floor of the kitchen while the infant cruised around in her walker, and we heard a crash. We forgot to put up the gate, and the baby fell down the stairs in her walker. 7 fucking stairs. She hit her head on the railing and died in the hospital after 3 days in the ICU. 4 years of PTSD for me. But no one really knew I was there. My best friend was branded a baby killer. High school was rough. What about you? Have you ever been put in a situation where you had to make a split decision that could have ended someone else's life? Have you had to make a choice that you feel could have ended just like one of the stories we just heard? If you have a story you would like to see featured here, please contact me through any of my social media links or email me at DuchessDark676@gmail.com. See you next time.